Shalom friends, my name is John and welcome back to the channel. When I tell people that I study and observe the laws of Moses, they typically assume that I'm Jewish. And when they discover that I'm a Christian, they believe I am greatly misguided for doing so. Laws of Moses? John, didn't you realize that Jesus came and did away with all of that? He came and taught something new. That Old Testament law is old and outdated. It's too hard to keep and too burdensome. That's why Jesus gave us new laws that are easier to follow. This is a commonly accepted and maybe a little exaggerated way of thinking in mainstream Christianity today. But is this a biblically accurate attitude towards the laws of Moses? There is a subscribed belief that the laws of Christ replaced the laws of Moses, and that Christians are only expected to keep these newer laws. The laws of Christ refers to only what is found in the New Testament, and we're only expected to keep those laws. But is this understanding correct? To answer that question, as with all things, we must put aside our biases and test everything that we know and hear against Scripture. Naturally, we should first ask, what are the laws of Christ anyways? Let's take a look at the only two places they're mentioned in the Bible. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. Okay, so we've established that there is something referred to as the law of Christ. But does that mean it replaced the Old Testament law? Let's take another look at one of these scriptures. In Galatians 6:2, we see that fulfilling the law of Christ is to bear one another's burdens. This actually aligns with what the Torah says in Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. If bearing one another's burdens are connected to the laws of Christ, and bearing one another's burdens is a form of loving your neighbor, and the Torah calls for you to love your neighbor as yourself, then we could safely deduce that the laws of Christ are not really new laws. Rather, the laws of Christ should be interpreted as a call to live in alignment with God's instructions, or His Torah, which is to love God and love others. In the book of Matthew, when Yeshua himself is confronted by some Pharisees, they attempt to trap him, and they ask him, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to them, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Notice Yeshua is not teaching anything new here to the Pharisees. He's actually quoting directly from the Torah. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk up by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You see, friends, along with this passage in Matthew, all of Christ's teachings have a foundation in the Torah. Forever, O Lord, your word is firmly fixed in the heavens. If something is firmly fixed in the heavens, that means it is unchanging. Yeshua himself reaffirms this in his message on the Sermon on the Mount. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Did you know that the word abolish used in the context of this scripture is actually an idiom for misinterpret? So another way we could read this verse is, Do not think that I have come to misinterpret the law or the prophets. Either way, Yeshua is reaffirming here that his Father's laws are unchanging, and that he did not come to misinterpret anything that has been taught. Yeshua further elaborates that not one stroke of the law is going anywhere until the current heaven and current earth pass away. Yeshua's own words reaffirm the validity of the Torah. Paul reflects this also when he says, Do we then overthrow the law by our faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. Paul rejects the notion that faith nullifies the law or abolishes the need for obedience. He says we establish the law through faith, which means we uphold or confirm. Speaking of old Paul, in one of his other letters, he declares that all scripture is profitable for training in righteousness. Obviously, at the time of him writing his letter, there was no such thing as the New Testament, which means he could have only been referring to the Old Testament, specifically the writings and the prophets. So if Christ replaced the laws of Moses, why is Paul here saying that all scripture is profitable for training in righteousness? I guess somebody forgot to tell Paul that Christ did away with those old laws. And lastly, to think that the laws of Christ refer to everything that Yeshua said and taught, then what about the scripture where he commands his disciples to follow the laws of Moses? Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach but do not practice." If you're unaware, Moses' seat was a literal and figurative seat of authority. Those who sat in that seat had the authority to teach and interpret the Torah. Yeshua was telling his disciples, hey, do what they're telling you to do, but don't do what they're doing because they're kind of hypocrites. He was basically saying that they were teaching the right things, but not practicing what they preach. Friends, Christ did not come and teach brand new things. Rather, he taught and exemplified genuine Torah observance based on love. I still study and keep the laws of Moses, because if we had to be honest, they're not really Moses' laws. They're God's laws handed down to Moses. They are still our instructions for righteous living today, and they are the foundation, the key to understanding all of Christ's teachings. The laws of Moses and the laws of Christ are not contradictory to one another. They are complementary toward one another. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you wouldn't mind, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to this channel. Also, drop a comment down below, and I will see you in the next teaching.